Guys, welcome back. Hold on, Barry. I'm just gonna wing it here. Welcome back to Snow White. I don't even know these things. Sleepy and Dumpy, right? Is that how?
Sleepy and Dopey.
Dopey.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm Dopey. That's Sleepy, and we all know who Snow White is, guys. So we're just coming on here. This is our second one, kind of winging it. Going to talk about some different stuff, guys. Today we're going to talk about having that list of importance on a daily basis, so we make sure that we're not being overwhelmed by what's being brought onto our plate. So, Mandy, when I say that to you right off the bat, what sparks to your mind?
So, do you know that I saw it on Facebook, but it was the story about a professor who had this big fishbowl that he put on the desk in front of a class, and he, first put these big rocks in it that completely filled it up, and he says to the class, "Is it full?" And everybody says, "Well, yeah, right. Well, it's totally full." Well, then he takes out some, kind of medium-sized rocks and pours that in. Now is it full? And they're like, "Well, yeah, obviously it's full." And then he takes out sand and he puts the sand in, and that fills in all those spaces that haven't yet been taken. And then he says, "Well, now is it full?" So I think the lesson for me is, if you can fit the big rocks in, if you can decide what your big rocks are on a day, then everything else the minutia is going to take care of itself. So it's really identifying for me those big rocks.
That's why we have her on the show, because she's full of great stories like that. I have zero of those cool stories.
Making stuff up. Yeah.
Never happened. But yeah, it's right? Because you can fill your day up with so much stuff, right? There's so much stuff, and this is a challenge I always have, right? And it's going back to the one thing, right? What is the one thing quote? Because I always forget it, Mandy.
What is the one thing that I could do that which by doing everything else will become easier or unnecessary? Close.
Right. Yeah. And I think the problem is as well is when you try and do everything, you essentially do nothing, right? Because you're trying to do a little bit here, a little bit there. Focused work is what we're trying to achieve, and focused work that gets us to where we're trying to go. I think it's so important that you figure out what's important, what's not, and you'll get to the unimportant stuff at whatever point, but what's important needs to be addressed now, right? And this also comes back to so much stuff is intertwined here, right? It's clarity, right? What are you trying to achieve? What are you looking for? What are you trying to do? And if you don't understand that, well, you can't put those big rocks in because you don't know what those big rocks are, right? Because you don't know what you're trying to fill.
And I also think a lot of this comes to do with how we feel about ourselves, right? I was talking to a coaching client this morning. The reason that he's a coach too, right? The reason that he's filling up all this unnecessary space is because he's living with imposter syndrome. So we're trying to add more on our plate so we feel like we've done more, but we're not getting anywhere. And you're almost giving yourself brain overload, and you're sticking yourself in neutral instead of understanding that this life that we're looking at is built on legacy. And what are the actual items every week that are going to make me feel? And here's what's great about this. If you create 3 or 5 things and you complete those by 9 o'clock, you're done. But what's interesting, right, is we always talk about time blocking, right? That's a big thing that everybody talks about. I got a new thing I came up with this morning. We don't need a time block. We need a mind block. And what I mean by that is when you're on a task or a certain task, I have a lot of realtors, right? And they can't get to their cold calls per week because they're showing houses or something comes up. It's just the realtor life. And I said, instead of trying to fit in 10 cold calls a day, what if you had a day where you didn't do anything and you were in the same mindset the entire day and you did 70 calls in one day and you were done on Monday? Well, then you just opened up the whole week to do whatever you want because you're doing the same thing instead of doing 5 cold calls, trying to go show a house, then come back to the cold. You can't get it done because you're trying to change your mind what you're doing too many times.
Yeah. So that actually speaks to that book, Deep Work, that I reference really, really frequently. It's you've got to go down and to do that deep work, and you've got to come up for air and to go back down. That takes time, that takes brain space, that takes bandwidth. So one thing I really preach that goes along with what you said, Austin, is this idea of batching. just like you're saying. Like if I'm returning emails, if I can do all of them all at the same time, then I'm in that same brain space and I'm not having to come all the way up for air and go back down. And, one thing that you said that really spoke to me was, you got to fill up all this space because, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. And I want to speak to that from kind of a feminine energy point of view, because I work with a lot of women. It's this idea of feminine energy as being open to receiving. The hunter mentality of go, kill, and eat what you kill is one thing, but then, just being and being open to receiving is something I see a lot of really high performing women forget about. I know that I certainly have. So just being open to see what comes your way is a big deal when dealing with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you said something there as well that was like, we talk about time blocking and we talk about productive stuff and we talk about, what is the next thing, but it's also your personality and who you are is so important to all of this, right? Like that spoke to me hugely when you said that, and I never thought about that, right? It's just because you're trying to figure out the most productive way to do it, and you're listening to podcasts and reading books, which we all do, right? And trying to figure out the most productive way to do it, right? But we got to figure out who we are and what works for us, right? And what mental state are we in? What mental capacity do we have? What kind of issues are going on, right? And it's trying to figure that out, right? Because some things don't work for all of us, right? We're all different and we're all in different spaces of our lives. We're all in different headspaces. Different things affect us differently, right? And trying to figure that out is almost more important. Like you said, that headspace, that, that mind blocking, right? Rather than trying to just be like, okay, everyone else does this, this, and this, so this is what I need to do, right? And that's what's going to work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, right? And don't get me wrong, you can steal stuff from other people, but you've got to figure out who you are and how that works for you.
Like, I know myself and I know all the things that, didn't work well for me in one of my first businesses. And the reason my business partners were upset with me and so now we have this new business and we have this new project we're working on. So I spent an hour on Saturday pulling all the documents that were in my email and I put them in one Dropbox file and sent them to the partners. This is a sales guy. This is not even my job. But I'm the one controlling this deal. And I asked him, I just got off a meeting with him. He's like, dude, this is amazing. And it's like, just understanding that yeah, just because it's in my head doesn't mean it's communicated properly.
Right.
And so those are the work that I've done over the years to understand the aspects of who I am and understand that, okay, what's the one or two things that I can do in my business? That's being on creating content, being on podcasts with y'all, and servicing my coaching clients, right? The rest of the shit ultimately doesn't matter, right? But that's me having to be okay. Because I was thinking to myself the other day, there's actually no real emergencies. Like, yes, you have a kid, that's a different kind of emergency. But like in my life, like unless somebody's getting hurt or somebody else needs to go to the hospital, there aren't any emergencies. I had a great entrepreneur that I know. He told me something that changed my life forever on the podcast. For years, he would answer emails from 6 to 7:30. And then he had an email that sent out, said, I will answer your email tomorrow. If you need anybody, call my team. I'm not answering my email. And so he had a house burned down and he didn't know about it. And he said, am I a firefighter? Like, could I have stopped the place from burning? Who gives a shit? And it made me think, like, he's right. I mean, like, at the end of the day, things are going to happen. It's how you deal with these things and how you react to them that either propels you towards where you're going or makes you walk 10 steps backwards because you're all over the place.
Yeah, it's the letting go of control. It's instead of being, it's Michael Gerber, right? Like, are you working in your business? Are you working on your business? At some point, if you're going to go past, this idea of being your own bottleneck, then you're going to have to let go of control and outsource. And, another thing that in terms of this big rocks thing, I did a program that Tony Robbins puts on called Rapid Planning something, RPM something. But basically the crux for me was thinking outcomes. That rather than in my to-do list, what are my, 3 things I need to do? What are the 3 outcomes I need to deliver? And that's a very different focus in terms of how you're going to, go about completing those items, because you're delivering an outcome rather than, putting call Barri off of a list, you know?
Mhm.
So that might help somebody think something through for their big run.
That's awesome. Think outcomes. That's that's a huge takeaway for this, because it makes a difference. Like, what are you trying to achieve, right? Like, you can put a list of whatever 20 things to do easily, right? That's that's an easy small list almost, right, that you can come up with yourself. But does that get you to where you're going to do, right? And like you said, think outcomes. I love that. I think this episode should be called Think Outcomes. I'm naming it right now. Think outcomes.
Well, there you go,
But,
guys.
right, but obviously it's going about clarity, where you're going, what you're trying to achieve, and what you're trying to do, right? And think outcomes can make that all that so much clearer for you.
Well, perfect. Barry, do you want to send us out of here?
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for listening. This was an awesome, fun episode. Anytime I get to share the Zoom room with Mandy and Austin, but you know, it's as we talked about, you can be busy doing as much stuff as you want, right? But if you try and do everything, you end up doing nothing. And I think it's important to remember that, right? It's good to be busy, it's good to be productive, but are you really productive? Ask yourself that. Think outcomes.